Yes, lads, welcome back to the NUFC360 podcast. I am joined today by Stephen and Bo. How are we doing, lads? Stephen, I imagine rather joyful after England's repeated final failure.
It's not coming home, is it? It's a great day. It's a great day for those of us who aren't English.
Bo, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I watched the game and it was unfortunate, but I think a lot of people from the UK are used to this and Gareth Southgate. So,
oh yeah, being a Newcastle and an England fan, as you can imagine, is quite a painful process. But anyway, enough about England. However, tonight's podcast does ironically link to England in a way, given the impending speculation around Gareth Southgate's future at England and the fact that he may look to move on following the Euros. There has been, let's say, some rumours in the press coming from various sources such as the Times, the Eye and the Daily Mirror that Eddie Howe may actually be considered a potential candidate for the England job. Now, this is pure speculation. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when saying that we don't want Eddie Howe to leave Newcastle. You can see in his record that he's done a magnificent job at Newcastle and helped in our transformation as a club. But from the outside, as a neutral, it would appear that he is one of the outstanding candidates to take forward the England role. So, Stephen, what is your thoughts on the link? For Eddie Howe potentially being the new England manager, is he the right man? Is that the right choice for England?
I'm not surprised that the rumor is out there. I mean, he's been almost groomed to be the England manager for a couple of years now. Like the media have linked him repeatedly. He is definitely probably, in my mind, the top English coach in football at the moment. You could maybe have made an argument a couple of years ago that Potter was on a level with him. But I think, it's unsurprising that Howe is linked. He's done very, very well in his time with us. Overall, his time at Bournemouth was very, very successful for the size of the club and the resources he had. He was always going to be one of the favourites, and I think the stylistic difference between him and Gareth Southgate and the success he's had and how likable he is and how sort of diplomatic he often is always going to sort of endear him publicly to England fans. I think he would be really good for England. I don't think it's that surprising that I would say that. We, like Newcastle United fans, we would agree he's an excellent coach. He's been brilliant for us since joining, and you know that when he's got talent at his disposal, he can get the best out of them. He's really good at maximizing the players he's got in his squad. And if there's one thing that you could say about England right now is that the national team does not get every bit of talent out of the players they've got. And you'd expect that Howe would be able to do a lot better in a more entertaining fashion, which does seem to be a bit of a trend in international football, in that we're starting to see some of the big teams start playing nicer football, more attractive, but still also effective football. I do think Howe would be really good at the job as Gareth Southgate's replacement. The likelihood of it, I think, is a little low. I think there are other candidates who I think I would be more likely to put money on. Graham Potter, we've already mentioned it, would be one of them. I think he's the bookies' favourite at the moment. And then there would also be who I would probably think would be the choice that the FA will make would be Lee Carsley, the under-21 manager. I think he's most likely to be the choice. But yeah, again, it's not surprising that Howe's in there. He's a fantastic coach.
Yeah, I think one of the things you obviously mentioned, is the impact that Eddie Howe has on the training pitch itself in terms of being able to improve young players, but improve the players he also has at his disposal. We saw that with players like Joe Linton, for example. Whereas in the England setup, that would be obviously a different role in the sense that you wouldn't be working with these players as much. However, with a World Cup coming up, in 2 years, in your home country, actually, Bo, and the chance to actually lead England in a home Euros, do you think there might be the temptation from Eddie Howe to actually say, you know what, this is an opportunity that I potentially can't turn down at this stage in my career?
Yeah, no, I mean, there definitely is going to be temptation for that. We've seen in the past, Eddie Howe knows how to, one, get the best out of his players, but two, is also very good at talent ID, especially when it comes to English players itself. Whether it was even though we missed out on Jared Bowen a number of years ago, still wanting to go back to him because he's seen his talent, going after Anthony Gordon. Even if he wasn't the most, illustrious transfer target at one point, we know that Eddie Howe does have a specific type of player, and if he is able to have that player on his team, he'll do very well with it. We've got a wealth of talent, when you look at the English roster, and it's something where I know he could definitely get the most out of everybody. I could tell you, Harry Kane probably would not be starting every game. He would have a little bit of rotation coming in, knowing when to have substitutes and when to change formations for different opponents would probably be something that you're going to see a lot more in the English setup. So I could, I 100% could understand that the temptation is there. And one thing that I do think is actually interesting, and I don't know how you all feel about this, especially with the way the season's going to be coming up and our run of games, and even with Amanda and Murdad leaving and having this new different structure, I will be interested to see, if the first couple weeks, how Eddie is going to deal with the new structure, and how that relationship is going to work out. Because if it's something where he looks at it and says, I don't know if this is something I want to be a part of anymore, it could be even more temptation coming in for him to go to England. So I think right now he's very content with the job that's being done at Newcastle. Obviously, he wants to bring more to the club, bring trophies, but temptation is always tough, especially when it comes to a position where anybody would be lucky enough to have it.
For what it's worth, I don't personally think Howe will take the England job. I don't know if the England job holds the value that it once held, in all honesty. And I think, it's a lot of pressure to take on as a manager, and you come under quite a lot of scrutiny. I think obviously the Newcastle job obviously takes on a lot of pressure in itself, but I think taking the England job would obviously be a different level of pressure. Regarding the new setup, I think Darren Eales has been there for a while, and by all accounts, they seem to have a good relationship, and he's he is quite positive in what he says about Eddie Howe. So I don't foresee any problems. I think Howe's obviously probably worked in situations like at Bournemouth, where he started in League Two, for example, where he's probably had a lot worse to deal with than what he's dealing with now. I mean, ultimately, he's there as a coach. He's there to improve players, and he's got a forward-thinking, backroom staff that will ultimately look to try and improve his squad that he's got there for him. So I don't foresee any issues. But Stephen, I mean, do you see any problems there? Do you think Howe might be tempted, given any potential backroom changes at the club?
I mean, in terms of the actual project, I mean, we know that. I mean, it's as we touched on, there was already a strong relationship with the now outgoing Amanda Stavely and Murda Gudusi. We've seen it both in the Amazon documentary. We talked about it in a preview in the last episode of this show, talking about them leaving. I don't think it would affect that too much, because Howe has always struck me as a guy he's just focused on his job on the pitch. We've heard from reports before, particularly in The Athletic by George Caulkin and Chris Waugh, that he doesn't want to be involved as much in the boardroom and in the actual management decisions. He wants to just focus on the coaching. And I think that would benefit the England setup as well. They've got a guy who his whole purpose is, as you guys say, he wants to just improve his players. I think as well, Ryan, you talk about the pressure at England. I don't think there's been a better time to become England manager. As much as there'll be a lot of England fans who refuse or try their hardest to avoid giving Gareth Southgate credit, but he's done a tremendous job off the pitch, building a sort of a culture, an atmosphere, and a foundation that I think most coaches would be really pleased to take over. England historically have had a horrendous relationship with the press. England's relationship with the press now has never been as healthy as it is at this current moment in time. He's got a really strong dressing room of for the most part, really likable players. Another thing you couldn't always say about the England squad. It's a team that's now full of players who are used to going deep in tournaments. So there's already that sort of mentality of fighting to the end of games and getting far into those knockout competitions that would serve any incoming manager well. And I think that would all benefit Howe. Howe's also shown an ability to be flexible in his tactics. And I think it's very easy to argue, Howe loves the minutiae of the day-to-day coaching, and that probably is the case. But he would almost certainly be able to adapt his system to be less physically intense, something that we've seen be a hallmark of this side is players taking time to bed in. I would have complete faith that Howe would be able to put forth a system that would get the best out of England's attacking talent, but have it done in a way that's easier on the players. We've seen some really good coaches come into international football and struggle to do that. You look at Luis Enrique got Spain playing in a way that was really good, but then he wasn't able to adapt it to make it really work in knockouts. But then you look at this tournament, Julian Nagelsmann at Germany, a guy who, by all accounts, is a very intricate tactician, came in and adapted his approach, and he got Germany playing really, really well. And they were, at least by my reckoning, the second best team in the tournament up until obviously they met the Spanish. So yeah, I think I would be slightly, not significantly concerned, but I'd be slightly worried that Howe could take the job. Just because I think, like you guys say, going into a World Cup in 2 years' time, I don't think there has been a better time to become the England manager. And I think Howe's stock, unless you maybe count last summer, Howe's stock has never really been this high. And there's no telling if it might dip. You don't know if things might suddenly become stale at Newcastle and he doesn't do a good job next year. So sometimes if big opportunities present themselves, you just have to take them. So I think it's possible that Howe does take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing, we have noted in the Premier League in the last couple of years is perhaps that lack of loyalty to managers these days. You can very quickly lose your job in the Premier League these days. And like you said, Stephen, whilst Howe's stock is as high as it is, you might think this is an opportunity that's too good to pass up. We don't know what Howe's thinking ultimately. It might have been his dream since, childhood or since he finished his playing career to be the England manager. He obviously holds some loyalty to Newcastle in terms of being a well-respected guy here at the club. But again, football careers are short, management careers are also relatively short, and this might be an opportunity that, he might not be able to pass up on. But let's hope not. Whilst probably unlikely, right now there is going to be a day that Eddie Howe does depart Newcastle, and we have to look at, who could be potentially the next manager of Newcastle. Now, obviously, we will have, I would imagine, some clear bookmakers' favourites in terms of Mauricio Pochettino, probably, given his work with Paul Mitchell in the past. But I imagine there might also be some names prop up that have also been linked with the Newcastle job before Howe came in. So your names like Paulo Fonseca, perhaps Zinedine Zidane, Jose Mourinho, some of those names that are always kind of linked in and around the Newcastle job. But Stephen, who would you expect to be up there in terms of the bookmakers' immediate favourites if Eddie Howe was to leave the club this summer?
I mean, the obvious one, even though he's got a job now in Turkey, is Jose Mourinho. I think it's lazy sort of journalism to link him because of the links he's got with the club. But Mourinho is as much of a rogue character as he is. You wouldn't put it past him to just give up on a club right away if a huge club came in for him. So I think he will be one of the favourites despite him currently having a job. I think you're right in that Pochettino will probably be up there. Fonseca's just got a new job as a manager at AC Milan. So he's probably fine. In terms of other people who might get linked, I mean, we'll probably might get linked to the likes of other managers who are available at the moment. And Thomas Tuchel is around. You'll probably see some very, very vague links to Jurgen Klopp. And there's always going to be, like you mentioned, Pochettino's linked to Paul Mitchell. There are a couple other managers around that we could see linked just because of that link. Obviously Pochettino, but there's also Niko Kovac, currently out of work, who's won a couple trophies. He's won a couple trophies before. And he plays attacking football. There's Philip Clement, who's at Rangers, who are having financial problems yet again. So he could always be a candidate. There's Adi Hutter, who's currently at Monaco. Who again is another very highly thought of manager. I think those guys will probably pop up a bit. And you'll probably see some of the standard British names thrown out there as well. You'll see David Moyes will be linked because he's out of work, or you might see Kieran McKenna. You'll probably almost certainly see Frank Lampard linked to us, and none of those I'd put much stock in, but they'll probably be there. I think I would, if I was to ever suggest that, I would want to be sectioned.
I think for all our sakes, let's just pretend I never said that. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing. Obviously, the links to Paul Mitchell and some of the coaches that have worked there. Am I right in saying that Nagelsmann actually worked under Paul Mitchell as well at Leipzig, or am I wrong in saying that? I mean, that's an interesting
You're
link.
correct, yeah.
So obviously a young manager, obviously just signed a new contract at Germany, but nonetheless an interesting link. But in terms of Pochettino as a manager, now he's a manager that splits opinion. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of him in the world. I do think he's got a good track record, you know, of what he did at Tottenham in terms of developing young players, finding players, improving players. But what do you think specifically, if Pochettino was appointed, do you think he would be a good fit for Newcastle? What do you think he would actually bring to us in terms of on and off the pitch?
Yeah. Funny enough, you know, I think he would be okay. You know, you did point out that he does have a good track record in terms of bringing youth through the system and actually giving them time. We've seen that at Spurs. We've seen that at Chelsea, even most recently last year. And with the way our setup is, especially with the academy and bringing a lot more talent in, we can definitely see them cycled through a little bit more through games or through cup matches as well. So I do think that would definitely be a benefit. I personally don't know if he would be the greatest fit, mainly just because with the way PIFR and with the way chairman kind of approached what he wanted the club to be, you know, essentially, I want it to be number one. I tend to feel like they might look towards somebody who actually has a proven track record of trophies, especially now that, you know, Howe had come in, saved us from relegation, took us to the Champions League, and, you know, kind of kept us afloat for a bit. They definitely want to be able to take that next step, and I don't know if they would want to take that chance to have somebody who may not have that experience. So honestly, funny enough, we're talking about some of these names. You know, we're talking about Zidane. You know, I could see it happen. You know, hey, he's won trophies at Real Madrid. He hasn't done anything ever since. I could see them kind of just be like, all right, you know, he's won trophies before. We'll back him. He's got the financial backing. Let's see what happens. Do I think it would work? Probably not. But I do think it would be at least somewhat interesting to come out and use. Another name that I think would be very, very peculiar, and I don't know if it would work at all, but Edin Terzic, after leaving Dortmund, you know, looking at their style of play and kind of what we do as well, I think the football would probably be a bit boring, but there probably would be some results that definitely shake our way. So as always, we're talking, you know, very speculatively, but I think it would be an interesting choice to look at, especially with what we kind of are building down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, some interesting names thrown there. Regarding Zidane, I would be very, very surprised to see him at Newcastle. I think, you know, he's been offered jobs since coming out of the Real Madrid job. He doesn't seem to be that keen to get back into management. But I do think, you know, it is an interesting phase. I think taking away Howe and the England links, the next managerial appointment, regardless, is going to be an interesting appointment, because I think Newcastle right now are in the phase of their project where, you know, they may want to look towards that elite manager that has a track record of winning trophies. However, the problem they may have is actually bringing that talent to Newcastle itself in terms of being able to convince them, yes, it's a good project, and yes, it's an exciting project, but we've seen with FFP restrictions and stuff like that, that it's not just necessarily an open checkbook, do what you want. There's a lot of rebuild and a lot of stuff to build from the ground up. But nonetheless, I think, you know, at this point, we should probably look ahead at some other potential targets. Stephen, I'm interested to hear some of the names on your list in terms of potential Howe replacements. I mean, personally, I would like to see someone that would continue kind of what Howe's been doing in terms of Howe's style of play. I'd like to see high pressing, attacking football, and someone that can look to, you know, improve players on and off the pitch ultimately and build that good character that Howe has. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts. What would you envision as the next Newcastle United manager if you had the choice?
I mean, yeah, you raise a good point regarding the style of manager. I think it would be very important to set out that sort of requirement first before looking at the names. I mean, the way that we have operated as a club suggests that while we did go for Unai Emery before we went for Howe, I think that the way the club is now structured is that they will be sensible enough and clear-headed enough to continue with a similar style, to not then necessitate a huge squad turnover, they'll
Mhm.
probably go for a manager who would, at the very least, either be similar or the same stylistically as Howe, or be maybe a step ahead in terms of where we were naturally going to go. Because I think what we've seen is we've effectively followed the early Jurgen Klopp Liverpool pathway. Manager comes in at a low point for the team, takes us up, sort of cements us at a good level. We start with this very physical and intense pressing system that over time starts to get more ball dominant. And we saw last season compared to the fourth place season, we jumped from that first season to last season in possession by 5% per game. So teams have started to realize that our pressing is as much of a threat as it is, that they need to give us more of the ball because it's harder for us to break teams down. So I think then the natural progression is to become more ball dominant, and I think that's what we will likely do it regardless, like how being still at the club or not. Is that the players that we've been linked to repeatedly have all been pretty good on the ball and all really comfortable passers, or good creators, or have other attributes that we can then facilitate with other players with quality on the ball. So I think that sort of manager, like you say, Ryan, in the pressing style, energetic football and entertaining attacking football, someone who looks to sort of entertain but still win games, would be the preference. I think the obvious link would be, Maurizio Pochettino. I think he did a very underrated job at Chelsea last season. I think a lot of people give him a lot more stick than he deserves for the state that club has been in. I think he's a really good coach. He has, however, had a little bit of an issue dealing with management above him. Whether or not that's because the management he's worked with has been Dan Levy, PSG, like Leonardo, and then Nasser Al Khelaifi, and then Todd Bowley and the Clear Lake ownership at Chelsea, all of whom have not necessarily been the best management in terms of facilitating a coach. And this is the same sort of thing you probably level at Thomas Tuchel, is that they have these reputations for falling out with boards a little bit, but it's unclear whether or not that is true or if it's just that they've been at tumultuous clubs. Thomas Tuchel would also be another manager I'd be interested in because track record of winning trophies, has gotten further in Champions League with PSG than any other manager, which is something that is a pretty good statement considering PSG has routinely failed in the Champions League, and has at times in his career coached teams who play really nice football. You particularly look at his time at Dortmund. Some of the less known names I would probably go for. There's a lot of guys who've sort of signed new deals or extended their contracts recently. So there's some obvious names that you maybe wouldn't go for. Like we've just seen Kieran McKenna has sort of stayed at Ipswich, for example, or Francesco Farioli at Nice, who's a really highly regarded young manager, has just joined Ajax, for example, or Fonseca, we've just mentioned, has joined AC Milan. The sort of names I would go for, I'd start with one that's in the Premier League already, and we know that this club seems to like Premier League experience, would be Andoni Iraola at Bournemouth. High pressing manager, had a bit of a slow start, but then took a squad that on paper was not very good, and had them playing really good football. And I think that he, with the squad that we have, would be really excellent. Some other names that I really like, for example, I don't know for anyone who's a fan of La Liga, would probably know the name Garcia Pimienta, who's the current manager of Las Palmas, who we've got one of the, on paper, and I mean no disrespect to them, but one of the worst squads in Spain. They've got a couple of really good, really promising young players, a couple I'd happily have at Newcastle United, but that squad on paper is not worth very much. It's pretty poor, and Pimienta got them playing really modern football. He's followed the sort of the Guardiola pathway. He's a former La Masia manager, then joined Las Palmas in the second division in Spain, and they now average I think last season they averaged the second most possession in the league, at which like they managed to play this positional play possession style against even the biggest teams in Spain, with a squad 1/100th the value of Real Madrid's, for example. And he's got a really good track record of hitting the ground running and getting that coaching principle across quickly, which I think is another thing that we would look for. So he and Iraola, obviously, there's a bit of a Spanish link there. There's some other obvious names. I mean, we've mentioned Michel. He's just I can agreed a longer deal. I think Ruben Amorim has shown that he's probably available. He likes a young player. He likes to develop young players. His sporting side play good football. He's tactically flexible, and I think he would also be a really, really good fit. I think if I had to pick anyone to come in, I think I'd probably want Thomas Tuchel. You'd want the name, like you want that name recognition. But I think in terms of where we need to be as a team going forward, which is, I think, being more ball dominant because the best teams in the world play that style, I would go for a Garcia Pimienta, probably as a bit of a rogue choice. My extra rogue choice, however, my sort of wild card.
Here we go.
Is we've seen a little trend particularly in the Premier League now in English football, is that Pep Guardiola assistant managers have routinely gotten jobs. Like we've seen Arteta do a really good job. We've seen Enzo Maresca go and do a really good job at Leicester and now get the Chelsea job off the back of that. There is a very highly regarded assistant called Carlos Vicens at Man City, who only recently sort of mutually backed out of a job in the Netherlands because the club that Heracles he was going for, and they're having some problems. He's very, very highly regarded at City. He's relatively young. I think he's 41 years old, so he's a little younger than Howe is. He's very, very well liked by the players, and we've seen that assistant managers who are the younger assistant managers at City who've been well regarded by the players have often gone on to be very effective coaches. Guardiola talks very, very highly of him, and his initial role was with the youth setup where he did pretty well with Man City, and then became an assistant manager, much like Jason Tindall, with the remit of being the set piece coach under Guardiola as well. And City last season set the Premier League record for set piece goal difference. They had the most goals scored. I think it was like 21, 20 something. And then they only conceded once from set pieces. He was clearly an effective coach. He's very, very highly regarded. And I think he'd be my out there choice.
I think that's interesting. And it's almost like these days, I think the obsession of replicating Guardiola ball, you could almost be a kit man at Man City and probably walk into a job in the top 4 divisions in English football these days. It is getting quite interesting. But I think there's some good names on there. And funny enough, Pimienta was actually one that somehow I had on my list as well. I'm quite happy about that, actually. I must feel like I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, in terms of Las Palmas, what I did like about him, I've not seen a lot of them play, admittedly, but they are very brave. And even when they're playing against the big teams, like you said, Stephen, they don't tend to shy away from their style, which is something that I think is important for us. We want to have that positive brand of football, which I think we all like to see. And having a coach and giving a coach like that an opportunity might be a good mark. I think you named some good names there. I think in terms of some of the other names on my list, I think Amorim was pretty high up there. He's been linked with a lot of jobs now in Europe. It might well be his time where he takes the plunge, and West Ham were obviously in from. He maybe wasn't so keen on that, and Liverpool decided maybe to go for Arne Slot over Amorim, but he has done a good job at Sporting. He plays that high pressing football. He did win the league there. He could be a potential interesting choice. Another one I had written down was the Stuttgart manager, Sebastian Hoeneß.
Mm-hmm.
So he's also, again, typically high pressure man-to-man football, kind of similar to Eddie Howe in a way. Done a good job at them, just got them into the Champions League. In terms of some Premier League names, one name which might split a bit of opinion, I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on, Thomas Frank. Now, I'm not saying necessarily he would be my number one choice by any means, but would you consider Thomas Frank in the running, both for the Newcastle job, in terms of he's a manager that does play a fairly good style of football, and he has, to be fair to him, kept Brentford in the league and established them as a good, consistent Premier League team now?
Yeah, he's done all right, to be fair, especially with Brentford. The style they play into, the structure of the club itself. They don't really make a huge splash, and he's done well with what he has. So I guess with a little backing, it would be interesting to see how exactly his skills and his coaching style would translate to a place like Newcastle.
Had Stevens wild card, safe choice, and Man City Guardiola ball choice. I'd be interested to hear who would be your number one choice, hypothetically, if Eddie Howe were to leave Newcastle.
Man.
Is there someone you would like to see come in and take
I
over
mean,
the reins?
just to throw a name out there for a wild card. Let's go with I'm not going to use the word disgraced, but let's go with the exiting Barcelona manager Xavi, just to see what would happen. He's been able to take talent and use it. I mean, granted, it's Barcelona, so everything that's there is pretty much handed to you on a silver platter. But I would be interested to see kind of if his tactics or if his management style would translate to the English game. Probably not, but it'd probably make for a bit of exciting times for the most part.
I mean, speaking of rogue choice, I don't know why Xavi Hernandez makes me think of him. He's just left an international tournament as well himself with Uruguay, and he knows English football pretty well.
I was just about to say that.
I'm a big fan of Marcelo Bielsa. So maybe a season or two, maybe a season or two of Bielsa murder ball, just to entertain people.
That would be amazing. I think in terms of entertainment value, you wouldn't get any better than that, would you? I think to be fair to Bielsa, he has done a good job at Uruguay. I mean, maybe he's probably a good
coach.
He's a very good coach. I mean, you hear what Guardiola says of him as a manager in terms of, he looks up to Bielsa a lot as a manager and as a person. It would be a very interesting choice. Obviously, when at Leeds, he did a great job, but defensively, they struggled. But you could argue that he would have a lot better defenders at Newcastle than he would have at Leeds at the time. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of my number one choice, I think I would probably go for Ruben Amorim if you could persuade him to join. But I do think there's some interesting choices in there, and there's been, some very, interesting wild card names thrown in as well. We want to end on a positive, and we need to again state, I think, what Eddie Howe has done. I mean, look at his record there. You can see it on the screen. 62 wins in 125 games, and that in itself speaks very highly, of the job that Howe's done. I think ultimately we all want Eddie Howe to stay. I think he's the right man for Newcastle, and he, hopefully this season he'll continue to push us on to higher levels. Any thoughts on that? Any additional comments to add to that?
I don't have any. I think the goal is top 5 in a trophy or a cup run. But I do think Eddie has the ability to do that with backing. So hopefully the rest of the transfer window goes well. We signed some great talents, and we can kick it on this season.
Yeah, Stephen, as much as it probably would be quite fun to see a front three of Anthony Gordon, Callum Wilson and Harvey Barnes with Dan Burn slotting in at left back for England, I'm guessing you assume the same. You'd want to see Eddie Howe stay at Newcastle ideally, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. I think that Eddie Howe clearly does his best work at club level. He's been reportedly asked before and said that this is not the right time for him. I think that was last summer he was asked about it when there was rumors about him being linked again, and he said it was not the right stage of his career for that yet. So I think it's unlikely that it will happen. I'd absolutely want him to stay. I think he's a brilliant coach. He's the best manager we've had since Sir Bobby. I think that the players love him, the club loves him, the fan base adore him. There's no reason that would push him out the door. And yeah, I think you should stay.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, guys, I think we'll wrap up there. If you did enjoy it, obviously leave a like, comment if you disagree or agree with anything that we said. Again, purely speculatory, but something different. And we're going to keep the podcast firing out. So please subscribe, and thank you guys both for your time, and have a good evening.